Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are back with another recap, and the tournament that we're covering is the Tata Steel Chess Tournament, which is being held in Wijk aan Zee in the Netherlands. Now, this tournament is probably the most illustrious chess event. It is the longest running event. This year's edition is the 88th edition of the tournament. The first edition of this tournament was held all the way back in the year 1938. So this tournament has been held many times. All the top players throughout history have competed since 1938, and this year's field is very strong, with many top players including the reigning world chess champion Gukesh Domoraju. Now, the first game we're going to start with, being played in the Masters section, is between Hans Niemann, the future first American world champion, and Vladimir Fedoseev, originally from Russia, but I believe now representing Slovenia. So we have Hans with the white pieces, and the game starts out with the move e4. We get the move e5, and now we have knight f3, and Fedoseev plays the move knight f6. Now, this is what is known as the classic Petrov's defense. It is considered to be one of the most solid approaches in the game of chess. I will add as a little side note that for a player like Fedoseev, who in my opinion is very creative, it seems a little bit out of his style or out of his element. So I don't really love this choice from him just as a general stylistic opening choice, but this is what he goes for. We get knight takes e5, d6, knight f3, knight takes e4, d4, d5, bishop d3, bishop d6, and now both sides castle. Hans goes c4, and now we get the move c6. Now, all of these moves have been played probably 1,000 times at this point. This is considered to be the most common approach in top-level chess games. We get rook to e1, bishop f5, queen b3, queen d7, and now we get the move c5. Here, Fedoseev plays bishop c7, and now we get the move knight to c3. Now, this is probably the most critical moment of the game for a couple of reasons, as we're about to find out in the next couple of turns. When Hans plays the move knight c3, this is one of a couple different options. White can play knight c3, white can play knight bd2, white can play g3. All these moves are playable, and if I'm being honest, I actually have looked at all of these moves as far back as 2022 when I played Jan Nepomniachtchi in the Candidates tournament in Madrid, Spain. So all these moves are very common, and they've been played a lot. Queen c2 is another option. So white basically has 1, 2, 3, or 4 moves that are played here. So Hans plays move knight c3, and one of the things that I think is very tricky, or why I said that I don't think this opening fits Fedoseev's style, is this starts to become a memory test. And what I mean by a memory test is you're in a situation where you have to remember the exact moves that you play, because in this position it's already very critical. This pawn on b7 is not hanging right away. If white were to take, there's bishop takes h2, checking the king, you win the queen, the classic fossil, and black wins the game. But having said that, there's a ton of pressure. There's pressure on this pawn long term, pressure in the center of the board. Black hasn't developed the rook or the knight here. So it's a very critical position. And if you don't remember the exact variation here, you can get into trouble. Now, the reason this is important as well is that in top level chess, a lot of what goes into it is memorizing or repeating your variations before the game, or spending a lot of time before a tournament doing this. Now, when you spend so much time doing this, it's very easy to get confused at the board. Now, in my opinion, what happened when Hans played the move knight c3 is that Fedoseev simply forgot his preparation. I believe that Fedoseev's intention here, or what he had in his files at home before the tournament, was to play the move knight takes c5, forking the queen and the bishop. Now, if white were to take the knight after bishop takes d3, black is simply up a pawn in the center and winning the game. Once again, queen takes b7 fails to bishop takes h2. If you play a move like g3, black can simply develop the knight. If you take, there's rook to b8 here, and the queen is getting trapped. So it is my firm belief that this is probably what Fedoseev had in his files and chess base that he simply forgot to look at or confused during the game, because after knight takes c5, white usually plays bishop takes bishop, takes, knight takes rook, bishop to f5, and temporarily black is up a rook for a bishop, but you'll notice his knight in the corner is kind of stuck. Knight can't get back into the game. Now, after knight to a6, the line goes on. White plays bishop d2, there's g6, bishop d3, knight b4, bishop to f1, knight bc2, rook to c1. And now I think computer says a5 is the best move, but this is a very long variation that goes on forever. I'm not going to get into whether this is playable or not. I have a weak engine on my computer, but this is probably what Fedoseev intended to do. But instead, Fedoseev plays the move rook to e8, and he spends nearly 6 minutes before playing this move. This move, of course, is completely fine, but after we get the move bishop to e3, here we get the move bishop g6. Hans goes g3 here, setting up the threat of queen b7. Again, it always fails to bishop h2. Now after g3, if black say plays h6, after queen b7, it's the classic uh-oh spaghetti-o moment. There's no bishop h2 checking the king. If you take the pawn here, white simply will trade the queen, and in this position, white has one extra piece on the board. Now here, after spending 7 minutes, now Fedoseev plays move knight takes c5, and this move simply loses on the spot. Now, the big reason that I mentioned that I suspect that Fedoseev's idea was to initially play knight c5 in that position earlier, there are two reasons. First of all, knight takes c5 is definitely not the move in this position. It feels very wrong. Even if you miss the tactic that eventually wins the game for Hans, it just looks wrong. Additionally, in all these variations, let's say we go back all the way back here, if white ever plays move g3, stopping black from playing from being able to have this fossil on h2, almost always black is at some point going to play this move b6 here. For example, g3, b6 is fine. After knight c3, rook to e8, if white goes g3 here, again you play b6. So in all these lines where white plays g3, the move is b6. And because the move is b6, this leads me to believe that what Fedoseev confused is that his idea was after knight c3 in his files to play the move knight takes c5, and he confused the order, and then he was simply unsure what to do, so he plays this move knight takes c5 here. But now, of course, it loses because after takes and queen takes b7, suddenly Fedoseev resigns the game. Now, the reason Fedoseev resigned the game is that here the rook is under attack. Knight to a6 is the only way to guard the rook. Bishop guards the knight, but now white has the very nasty tactic, knight to e5, forking the queen and the bishop here. If black were to take with the bishop, it's a Botez gambit, and you resign the game. And if you take with the rook, after queen takes rook, back, queen takes pawn, white is up a rook for a bishop, and with the weak knight, the weak bishop, the open e-file looming, black has no hope. Now, the reason that I think that this happened as well, one last point I want to make before we move on, is that in this position, even the move knight to d4 is still very good for white. After knight takes c5, queen takes c6, you're supposed to play bishop b6 here. White can play knight takes pawn, and again, white is simply up a pawn here. Now, Fedoseev is such a strong player. In my opinion, there's no way that he ever could have reached this position and not calculate it. So I think what happened is he simply knew that he was out of his prep, and he thought knight takes c5 was the move here, and he just confused this position with the position after knight to c3. Now, this of course is why top level chess is such a brutal grind, because Fedoseev in this game essentially forgets a move order in this opening, and that's the difference between playing a game and just losing where it's not a game at all. Hans had to find exactly 0 moves in this game. In fact, I think pretty much up to this point, this all very likely was prep, because we see that Hans has played these moves in 9 minutes. Hans has not used any time. He's looked at this position at home, and what happens is Fedoseev loses the game simply because he confuses a specific move order, and that's all she wrote. So that's why, back to the main point I said about Fedoseev, I think openings like the Petrov are not suited to his style, because Fedoseev is a very creative player, and when you are a creative player, you generally want to get into the game, you want to have the opportunity to be creative. When you play openings like the Petrov, there are some variations like this where you literally have to remember every single move, and if you make even one mistake, you just lose the game, and your opponent has done absolutely nothing to win the game. So, a shocking result with Hans winning this game in 16 moves. This means that Hans is currently the leader in the tournament. So Hans wins in 16 moves. So now let's move to another game from the first round. This is a game between Vincent Keymer from Germany and Anish Giri from the Netherlands, the hometown hero. So Vincent is a very strong player. He's currently ranked number 4 in the world. He just narrowly missed out on qualifying for the candidates, but he is one of the rising stars and one of the players that I expect to contend in the candidates tournament and maybe in the world championship down the road. So we get d4. Anish plays d5, we get c4, and Anish decides to play the classic Queen's Gambit accepted. Vincent plays knight to f3, knight f6, e3, and now Anish plays e6. Now Anish, being the great theoretician playing at the top level, he of course plays e6. He does not play the dubious move bishop to g4, which has been championed by international master Levy Rosman recently, because at the top level, if you play dubious lines like bishop g4, you're probably going to get severely punished. So we get e6, we get takes, c5, castles, a6, and now we get the move rook e1. Anish plays knight c6, we get knight c3, and here we get the move bishop e7. Now, one of the drawbacks playing the Queen's Gambit accepted is that white always has the option to take the pawn and go into what I would say is objectively a very boring endgame early on, and it generally is a situation where if you play well with black, you'll be able to draw the game, but you generally don't get great chances to win. So we get d takes c5. We get the queen trade. Anish takes c5, and now we get to move knight d2. Anish castles. We get knight b3, bishop to a7, and here we get to move bishop to e2. Now, when white goes bishop e2, this is a very, very deep and nuanced move. White potentially wants to put the bishop on f3 to hit this diagonal. Additionally, with the bishop on c4, it's in the way of pressure on the c file. If white could get 50 moves here, for example, white would go rook c1, white would play knight to a4, and then white would go bishop f3. And now you'll notice there's the open c file. You have the bishop on this diagonal as well, and you can bring a knight to c5 to boot. So bishop to e2 has a lot of purpose behind it. You want to go bishop f3. You want to open up this file without having the bishop in the way of everything. So it's a great multi-purpose move. So Anish plays rook to d8. Vincent plays bishop d2, bishop d7, and now we get to move bishop to e1. Now this move is maybe a little bit tame here. I think bishop to f3 might be slightly more precise to hit the pawn on b7, but Vincent feels he has all day to go bishop f3, and he simply wants to open up both the c and the d files. Anish plays bishop e8. Vincent plays king f1, rook c8, and now we get the trade and the move rook to c1. Now, objectively, this position is equal. It should be a draw, but only white can play for the win in this endgame, and that's one of the big drawbacks to playing the Queen's Gambit accepted. So we get the move h6. Here we get knight to a4 from Vincent. Now he's trying to bring one of D's knights to c5 to hit both of these pawns. With the pressure on the c file combined with D's knights, white has a very promising position. So Anish plays knight to d4 here, temporarily sacking a knight, but he is attacking this knight on the rim. So we get pawn takes pawn. This is a mistake. Computer wants knight takes, and a very weird move, knight to b3. And apparently with the idea of rook c7 or knight to a5 hitting the pawn, white is still marginally better. Instead, we get e takes d4. Anish takes. We get to move rook c7. And here Anish plays the strange move rook to b8. Now, in this position, the correct move is to play bishop c6. This is a very, very tough move to play, by the way, because it's very hard to judge what's going on. I'm not sure what Anish missed here. I suspect he saw knight to a5, and he figured with the pressure on the bishop and the pawn, he was in a lot of trouble. But black has the very nice move bishop to e4 here. And if white goes knight takes b7, this is what I suspect that Anish missed, which is that black can play bishop to b6, attacking the rook, knight still under attack. And if white moves the rook, you lose the knight and you lose the game. And if you take the rook after bishop c7, f3, bishop d5, it's the classic uh-oh spaghetti-o moment. The horse is dead. The horse is trapped on the back rank. You move the knight anywhere, you're going to lose the knight, and with it, you're going to lose the game. So I suspect that this is what Anish missed when he didn't play bishop c6, because had he played this move, there's also bishop takes a6, another move, but after bishop b6, now the rook is trapped, and after takes, even if you don't know the exact outcome of this position, after bishop takes d4, it's impossible to believe that with a rook for a bishop, and white only having one lone pawn, despite having two connected pawns, it's impossible to believe that black should not be okay in this situation. But instead, Anish decides to go for the move rook b8. We get knight to a5, and now this pawn on b7 is under massive pressure. If black plays the move bishop to b6 after takes, for example, white can simply go b3. If you play bishop b5, white can trade, go knight d6, and now this pawn will fall for black. And with white having two outside pawns, white should win the game. So Anish here plays the move bishop takes d4, and to me this is a clear sign of Anish being rusty, having not played a lot recently, because this move just loses on the spot. Anish probably thought white has to do something like b3 here, and after bishop to e8 takes, and a move like rook to a8, we have even material. Both sides have 5 pawns on the board. Yes, white is still probably a little bit better, but it's nothing to write home about. But after bishop takes d4, Anish misses the very simple move rook to c4, and suddenly Anish is going to lose one of these two b's. If you move this b, you lose this one. You move this one, you lose this one. There is no way to guard either of the bishops here, and for that reason, Anish very shockingly simply resigns on move 23. So we've now seen 2 games that had really crazy abrupt endings with massive blunders. Fedoseev making a huge blunder, Anish making a huge blunder. Who knows what's going on? I do want to point out that the first round did start a little bit late because there was a climate protest that occurred. So maybe the players were a little bit out of sync amongst being rusty or something else. But there's 2 games which are just very bizarre and seem shocking for top level play. So Vincent gets on the board with a win in round 1 as well, so both Hans and Vincent are off to great starts. Now, the next game we're going to take a look at is from the second round played today between Faustino Oro, the rising hope from Argentina, who is all of, I believe, 11 years old. I might be wrong. He might still be 10, but I think he's 11 years old, who's trying to become the youngest grandmaster in the world. Now, Faustino is playing in the challenger section. There's the master section featuring the top players and the challengers, but he is one of the players that everybody is watching very, very closely, because if he stays on track, he can get a norm and become the youngest grandmaster in the world. So Faustino is the white piece against Erwin Lamy from the Netherlands, a very strong player, someone who's in his early 40s now, I believe, someone who actually had to deal with a bout of cancer, someone who's a very nice guy and a great veteran of the chess world. So Faustino opens with c4. We get e5, knight c3, and now we get to move d6. Now this, of course, is the classic English opening, the reverse Sicilian, as we also like to call it. Faustino goes knight f3, f5, d4, e4, and now the move knight g1. Lamy plays knight f6, and Faustino plays move bishop to f4, and here we get knight to h5. Now, what white would love to do is play e3 here, and we get a classic front structure, but the bishop here keeps a lot of pressure on this diagonal in the long run, so that's why we get the move knight to h5, trying to harass the bishop. Faustino plays bishop d2, we get g6, and now we get to move e3. Here, Lamy plays bishop g7, and we got to move knight to h3. Now, you'll notice here that black has wasted time putting the knight on the edge, but now the bishop is inside the chain, so the bishop doesn't have any scope on the diagonal. So we get knight h3. Lamy plays c5 here, and this move is simply a little bit too bold from Lamy. Now, Lamy is trying to play on a positional concept here. He's trying to rip open this diagonal, so he has this great dark square fianchettoed bishop, but this, on the other hand, gives access to this d5 square for the knights down the road. Also, if black were to play something like a6, white can maybe even go c5 to open up this other diagonal for the light square b. So that this was Lamy's whole idea. He fixes this pawn so the bishop can't get active, and he wants to keep this bishop at home, and he wants his bishop to be active on g7. So here we get bishop to e2. Lamy plays knight f6, and now we get to move knight to f4. Lamy plays knight c6, and here Faustino trades and plays move knight to d5. Now this, of course, is the drawback to the position, which is that white gets this great square for the pony on d5, and as you can tell, white is actually already substantially better. The other reason that white's substantially better is that this bishop won't have great scope, because white can always put the bishop on c3 to interpose this bishop. So white gets a great square, the dark square b now becomes active, and if there's ever a trade, the light square b also will have scope as well. So we get castles. Here Faustino plays queen c2, intending to castle queenside and play on the file. We get b6, here we get bishop c3, and now we get the move knight takes knight. Faustino takes with the knight. This move is actually a little bit imprecise. Computer wanted pawn takes knight. I suspect what Faustino didn't like about this is he thought that after knight to e5, and let's say white were to castle and queen d6, black has a little bit of a blockade here of the pawn. Black will try to push on the queen side, I should say, to attack this white king. And you could look at this and be a little bit worried about the position. So Faustino takes with the knight. He figures great bash and queenside castle, h4, h5. It should be good for white. So now we get the move bishop takes bishop, queen takes, queen to d6, and here Faustino plays the move f4, trying to take away this e5 square from the knight. Lamy decides to play end peasant, and this is probably the big mistake of the game. Now, some players probably think that end peasant is a required move, but here it's actually a big mistake. Computer wants knight to b4 here, and after knight to b4, if white were to trade, for example, black should be completely fine with his bishop on this diagonal, rooks coming to the center of the board, and white can't really claim to be better. So if knight to b4 had been played, computer wants this weird move h3. I think rook to d1 is a very human move. Worth noting that castles loses to knight takes a2, which forks the king and the queen. And after rook to d1, black can simply trade here and play bishop to d7. And after queen to e5, black goes queen f6, followed by rook to e8. And white has a passed pawn with d6 here, but it's not doing anything because black will win this pawn on e5. And if you play a move like, I don't know, castles, you get like rook to e8, takes. This pawn is not going anywhere, even if it gets a d6. Black will go rook d8 and pressure the pawn, and it's just not very special. Probably should be a draw. But Lamy decides to go for end peasant, but now after bishop takes f3, suddenly the bishop's on a great diagonal. White can castle, you still have h4, h5, and the position's very flexible, and here already I have a feeling that Faustino's going to go on to win the game. So we get rook to b8. Faustino plays knight f4, and excellent move here, opening up the diagonal and also creating a square for the bishop on d5. Here, Lamy plays knight to e5. We get check, king g7, and now we get the move castling to the king side. Now, castling to the queen side also would be fine, but in this position, the main reason that I believe Faustino castled king side is he realizes at some point he's going to need to play e4 to open up this f file and to open up this e file once he brings a rook to the center, and computer actually says this is the best move. Now, if we're all the way back in a position like this, for example, say black were to play bishop e6 here, I do believe the computer wants white to castle to the queen side, and the reason is because these F and E files here are completely clogged. Even say we get a position like this, the F and the E files are not going to ever open up. You can never push this pawn forward. So because these two files are closed here, castling kingside actually doesn't make a lot of sense. All right, so back to the game. Here, Faustino wants to play rook e1, e4, attack on the F and E files. So we get the move queen to f6. Now, this move loses on the spot. Bishop to d7 is the only move after which black can try to hang on. And if white were to play rook to e1, for example, here, black can go rook to e8. And after e4, you can play this move king to h6. And apparently black isn't lost. But frankly, putting a king on the rim like this just doesn't look very human. And it's very hard to play. So we get queen to f6. Now Faustino plays e4. Here, black can never take. So knight to, I guess, h5 or e6. I don't know which one's best. Let's just say knight to h5. And after takes, rook f1 check, bishop f5, bishop takes e4. All the pieces here in the center of the board are loose. White also has a queen for a rook and a knight. And this is just an epic disaster. So we get knight to g4. Here, Faustino plays queen g3, an excellent move, opening up potential fossils here to hit the rook. Also potential ideas like, say, black goes to a6. Suddenly you've got knight h5 winning the game. So between the threat of h3 and knight h5, also threats on the rook, at this point the game is pretty much resignable for black. So Lamy plays bishop d7, Faustino plays king to h1, we get king to h8, and now we get to move h3. Lamy goes knight to h6, and here Faustino plays the move pawn to e5, an excellent move. Black cannot take the pawn as there's knight takes g6, forking the king and the queen, and here white wins the queen and the game. So we get to move queen to e7, Faustino plays e6, bishop to e8, and now we get to move queen to c3, checking the king. Lamy plays king g8, Faustino goes queen to e5, we get rook c8, and now we get to move rook to f3. Now, rook to f3 is maybe not the best move according to the computer, but pretty much any move here is winning, and the biggest reason is that this knight on h6 is stuck. You can't ever bring the knight into the game. Additionally, the king is on a terrible diagonal as well. You can never move your queen, because if you move your queen, say like rook f3 and queen d8, there's e7 ending the game. So queen can't move, knight can't move. White, if you ever are able to trade the bishops, for example, suddenly white's knight gets into the action as well. So between the knight, the queen, the weak king, black's position is hopeless. Also, notice here that black has no open files for the rooks. They're on closed files as well. So all roads lead to a victory for white. So we get g5 in this position from Lamy. Faustino plays rook g3, pinning the pawn here, of course. Can't draw my arrows. And we get to move g4. Faustino plays rook to d1. We get to move bishop to g6. And here Faustino plays rook g to d3. Now, what Faustino is trying to do is he wants to move this bishop and create the classic kebab on the 7th rank. So say black goes to a6, there's bishop b7, takes, and after rook d7, you hit the queen. If the queen goes, you have queen g7 checkmate. So it's GG, why not? So Lamy plays rook to d8 here, and now Faustino goes bishop c6. Here we got the trade, and at this point, Erwin Lamy resigns the game because the classic kebab is incoming. There's also a bastion with knight d5, so you've got rook d7, which wins. If rook d8, you have knight d5, which is winning. Queen goes, I don't know, here. You've got knight f6. It's just game over. You also have e7, knight f6. Everything collapses. There's just no hope for black here between these two epic threats of rook d7 and knight to d5. Bishop e8 is maybe the best try, but after bishop e8, white can trade. If you take, there's rook d7, knight d5, and everything is collapsing in this position for black. It's just nothing black can do whatsoever. So that's why after rook takes d3, Erwin Lamy resigns this game. And with that, Faustino is now a half point off the lead in the challengers and showing how good of a player he is, because Erwin Lamy is rated 2634. He's no slouch, very strong player, but he makes this one positional error with c5, and Faustino just plays a very, very nice game and gets the big dub and proves why he, of course, is going to become a grandmaster very soon, even if he hasn't gotten the title just yet. So that's our one game for the challenger. So let's go back to the master section. And for our next game, we're going to take a look at this game between Fedoseev and Vincent Keymer today from the second round. Now, Obviously, Fedoseev got off to a horrendous start, losing in 16 moves yesterday. Vincent got off to a great start with a shocking 23-move victory over Anish. So it's a tale of two cities, or tale of two worlds, I should say. And let's see what happens in this game and whether Fedoseev can bounce back. So we get d4. Vincent plays knight to f6. We get c4, e6, knight c3, and now we get to move bishop b4. Now this, of course, is the classic Nimzo Indian defense, and Fedoseev plays queen c2, which is the most solid approach. White can also play e3, bishop d2, knight f3, g3, a3, f3, literally every move under the sun, but queen c2 is considered to be the most solid. So Vincent castles, we get knight to f3, and here Vincent plays the move c5. We get pawn takes pawn, Vincent plays knight to a6, and now we get the move g3, knight takes pawn, and the move bishop g2. We get knight e4, bishop d2, and here we get the move knight takes d2, and now we have knight takes d2 being played. Now, all of this is pretty standard theory at this point. This is pretty much well known, but here we get the move a6. Now, there's nothing wrong with this a6 move, but it's a little bit unusual. I believe that in this position, d5 is considered to be the most solid approach, but we get a6. Fedoseev castles, and now we get the move rook b8, intending to play b5. Now, coming back to what I said earlier when we started this recap with the first game between Hans and Fedoseev, this is a pretty standard position, but it's very rich with creativity here. It's not a position with fixed moves. You can only play one move to be okay. Here, you have some creativity. Do you want to play knight e4? Do you want to play a3? Do you want to play rook d1 or rook c1? A lot of different options. So, Fedoseev plays knight e4. And here we got the move knight to e8, and this move is a serious error by Vincent. Now, in my view, I think Vincent was trying to be very creative himself here. He knows that Fedoseev is coming off this terrible loss in round one, and he plays something that actually looks a little bit dubious to me. Now, I think this was in part, if he were playing, say, Magnus, for example, I think we'd probably get a move like b6, trying to fianchetto the bishop here. And this is just a very, very equal position. If white plays rook d1, for example, now you can go knight to e8. If white takes and plays like rook plays knight e4, now you can go queen to e5 or even queen to e7. Actually, queen e7 is apparently wrong for some reason. I think it's of a3 maybe, so maybe queen e5 is best. But black should be okay regardless. But when Vincent goes knight e8 here, I think that he actually, on top of being too optimistic, missed the next move that Fedoseev correctly plays, which is this move pawn to c5. Now, you're probably thinking, what's the big deal, right? What's the big deal? Who cares? Like, you can always play d6 or b6 to free the bishop. What's the problem? So here, Vincent plays queen c7, and this move is actually a big mistake here. Vincent should have played the move b6. I'm not actually sure why he didn't play this move. Maybe he saw knight a4 and he thought this was like very, very, very bad, perhaps. But nonetheless, in this position, after knight takes c5 and a move like bishop c7 followed by d6, it feels like black should be okay in this position. But Vincent goes queen c7, and this is also what I would say a classic show me the money moment. Because Vincent has to know here that if he can win this pawn, he's fine. But if white can keep the pawn here and get something like a3 and b4, white's going to win the game. So it's a very, very aggressive approach where Vincent is basically telling Fedoseev, show me the money. Either white proves there's an advantage, or black probably has great chances to create counterplay and win the game. So Fedoseev goes rook c1. Now Vincent plays move f5, and this is the start of really going wrong. At this point, b6 had to be played here by Vincent, trying to open up, trying to create space for this bishop. After knight to a4, computer even thinks b5, for example, with d6 would be okay here, and black has no major issues. But instead, Vincent plays f5. This is very provocative, and now Fedoseev just completely takes over the game. He plays move queen to b3, we get bishop to a5, and now we get this move knight to d2. Now the computer actually wants this move knight g5, which is really, really exciting, because after queen takes c5, there's knight d5, and the move rook fd1, and suddenly with all these passive pieces on the back rank, these four pieces, combined with D's knight so close to the black king, the rook's on the open file, queen hitting the diagonal, this is actually a disaster, and white is close to winning. But again, a computer is 3,500, a human is not. And it's very hard to calculate this line after pawn takes bishop, because if you play bishop takes and then the move knight to f7, for example, after takes, and queen e7, even though the pieces are passive, black very quickly can bring the bishop and the knight into the game, and you could actually end up losing this position from the white side. But of course, because computers are so ridiculous, white can sack the rook for the bishop, and after takes, you have bishop b7 hitting the rook and the queen, and after queen e7, takes, white has queen to a3 hitting the bishop and the rook and winning the game. Now this is, I believe, this is 7-move deep variation. There are a lot of pieces hanging everywhere. This is just not realistic for a human, in my opinion, to see this concrete line. So Fedoseev plays knight d2. When you also combine the fact that Fedoseev is coming off this horrendous loss, it's very easy to be a little bit hesitant, and knight d2 has its merit as well. White wants to go knight c4 here, and if black takes the pawn on c5, now after knight to d5, if black plays queen d6, there's knight c4, and look at these knights. Everything is going to get forked in the long run. So Vincent plays b6, and this is just a blunder, after which white is going to win the game. Vincent could have played b5 here to stop the knight from coming to c4, and white is still better after a move like knight b1 and rook d1 due to this pawn structure here potentially, but I don't know what would have happened. Instead, Vincent plays b6, and now Fedoseev correctly plays move knight to d5, sacking a pony. Vincent takes, plays rook to f7, and now we get the move c takes b6. Now you'll notice the queen and the bishop are under attack, and after queen takes pawn, white has the move knight c4, forking the queen and the bishop. And even though black is temporarily up the piece, you're going to lose this bishop, and now with the horrible pawn structure, the open c file, this is pretty much GG. So Vincent goes bishop b7, we get knight takes queen, takes, and here we get the move rook takes b2. Fedoseev plays rook to c5, we get rook to b5 here, and this move loses on the spot. Bishop d2 is the only move to try and keep the game going, but frankly there are many ways for white to be better, and probably the one that I think Vincent saw is he thought after e3 this bishop is going to get stuck here on d2. White has a great knight, the rook's infiltrating, and Vincent probably thought it was all but hopeless. So Vincent goes rook b5, but now we get the move rook to c1. Vincent plays knight d6, and here we get the move pawn to e3. Now you'll notice from the eval bar, computer says that rook to c8 would be winning, so after rook f8 there's some a4, and there's rook a8 which is winning. But at this point, when we take stock of the position with this great pony on d5, ability to hit this pawn, this bishop that's completely wayward, staring at absolutely nothing, combined with this bad knight, great knight, bad bishop, weak pawn, bad pawn structure, there's just no way for black to survive the game. So Vincent goes bishop d8, we get the trade. Now we get bishop f1, g5, and here Fedoseev plays rook c5, winning this pawn on b5. We get b4, here we get bishop to c4 being played. Knight takes b4 is also very good, but bishop c4 works because this bishop is just terrible on d8. You've got this great bastion, it's all but over. Vincent plays king g7, we get bishop b3, rook f8, and now Fedoseev decides to take the pawn. We get f4, here we get rook to d5, a nice move, hitting the knight and the pawn. We get bishop e7, Fedoseev trades and plays the move rook to d4. We get takes, h5, and now Fedoseev plays move knight to d3. Vincent goes king h6, Fedoseev plays knight to e5. We get h4, g4 is played here. G takes h4 also good enough, but Fedoseev wants to try to keep the two connected pawns together and roll them down the board. Vincent plays king g5, we get rook d5, king h6, and now we get the move knight to d3 with white intending to play the move pawn to f4. Vincent plays h3, we get f4, king g7, king h2, rook h8, knight e5, rook h4, and after the move rook to d3 here, Vincent simply resigns the game. He's going to lose the pawn on h3, lose the pawn on d7. White has two connected pawns and the outside juicer to push as well here, so there's nothing that Vincent can do to save the game. So a very, very impressive bounce back from Fedoseev. I think that for Vincent, he got a little bit too cocky, thought he could push the envelope a little bit too far here because Fedoseev had lost the previous game, and he gets soundly punished. So now Vincent is back to even, same as Fedoseev. They had the opposite results yesterday. Now Fedoseev wins, and they're both back to where they started. So that's this game. So let's move on to the final game of our recap, and we have the all-Indian battle between the Grandmasters Arjun Erigaisi and Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa. Now Arjun, another unlucky player like Vincent, just missed out on the candidates yet again, but he has been playing very well, and let's see what he has in store. Now Pragg, like Anish, is also qualified for the candidates, so who knows what openings he is going to show in this tournament. So we get d4, d5, c4, and much like Anish, Pragg also essays the classic Queen's Gambit accepted. Now here Arjun plays the move e4, and for those of you guys who have watched some of my recent recaps, like my recap yesterday of the Levy match against Julien Song, I mentioned that against the Queen's Gambit accepted, this move pawn to e4 is considered to be the most aggressive and testing approach, and Arjun loves sharp tactical positions, so it should come as no surprise that he goes for the big battle. So we get e5, knight f3, takes, bishop takes pawn, and now Pragg plays move knight c6. Now, temporarily, black is up a pawn, but you'll notice here that black is a little bit behind in development. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces on their starting squares, while white has developed the knight, the bishop, and white is about to castle the king. So in this variation, black is up the pawn, but it comes down to whether black can finish the development. So here we get queen b3 from Arjun, and this move is perhaps not the top computer line, but one thing that Arjun is very good at is creating complicated situations, and queen b3, even if the computer says black is fine, it immediately puts pressure on both of these pawns. So now Pragg plays bishop b4, we get knight d2, and here we get to move queen to f6, guarding the pawn on f7. Arjun castles, we get knight ge7, and now we have the move pawn to e5. Now, as I just mentioned, black is up a pawn here in the center. So if black can finish the development by castling the king, let's just say white were to go h3 and black gets castled, black is simply better. So because Arjun understands that, obviously, he plays the move e5. Pragg moves the queen. He does not take this pawn because after takes, you lose the bishop and it's spaghetti-o. So we get queen g6 here, moving the queen and guarding the pawn. Here, Arjun plays knight to h4. This, again, shows great understanding of the position. We get queen h5, and now we get to move knight d to f3. Now, what Arjun is aiming for here is he's really trying to get all these black pieces off their standard squares. This bishop here is a little bit loose. It's guarded by the knight, but it feels loose. The queen is on the rim. The king, I guess you can castle, but it feels very, very shaky. Now here we get to move bishop to a5 from Pragg, and this is the first big mistake here, but I will point out that when you see this position as a human, you don't know exactly what you're supposed to do. It's very easy to be afraid of things like h3 and g4, bishop g5, knight g5, and unlike a computer, we can't really avoid looking at these positions with zero emotion. So Pragg plays bishop a5. Computer wants either a5 or the move d3. Frankly, this shows the great psychology of Arjun Erigaisi, because in this position, d3 is just a weird move. You sack back the pawn, and what? Now you're going to castle. It still looks very weird because you've got the queen on the edge. White still has great scope. You got a great bishop on the diagonal. It just optically looks very dangerous. Additionally, a5 is the move that looks ridiculous as well because you violate all the principles. You're not castling the king, and you're just pushing a pawn to guard a bishop when the whole board is on fire on the king side. So if you're a computer, you can do this. As a human, you can't. And in many cases, when we look at chess with these engines, there are many situations where it's not about the best quote-unquote move. It's about where can you play something where your opponent has to find a move that is not natural or human whatsoever. So we get bishop a5, very logical move from Pragg, moves the bishop no longer under attack, still intending to castle, but now we get the move h3. And after h3, now Pragg is actually in serious trouble because g4 is an epic threat. Say you were to play a move like bishop b6 and white gets g4 here, the queen can go nowhere. If you move the queen, you lose the queen. You go here, you lose the queen. You go here, you lose the queen. So you would have to sack the bishop for the pawn. And after takes and a move like king h2, these knights guard each other. There's rook g1, pressure on the diagonal. There's no real threat for black, and white should win the game. So Pragg plays d3 here. I have to honestly laugh at the top computer move once again, which is this move h6. It's another move that looks absolutely absurd. You're pushing a pawn here, ignoring everything that's going on. I guess now if white plays g4 for some reason, if king h2, you have queen h5, and I guess now you can play rook f8, and I don't really understand why black is better here, just out of curiosity. What did I mention before? I think I mentioned this. I don't actually understand why is this queen h5. Now apparently white can go rook g1, and where with the idea of rook g5, whereas if black has the pawn on h6, obviously now there's g5 here winning the knight, and black will win the game. So this is very deep, very dank sort of clanker computer stuff that makes no sense at all. Therefore Pragg plays d3. Now we get to move queen takes pawn, and here Pragg takes on e5. But the problem now after knight to f3 is that when we get queen d6 and Arjun plays queen b3, there's a ton of pressure in the center of the board. Now, Arjun probably should have castled here, or not Arjun, sorry, Pragg should have castled here, but after knight to g5, you suddenly become very afraid of the threats, or even rook to d1, for example. Say you go queen b4, there's bishop takes pawn. If you take, it's checkmate, you can't go back. If you go away, there's moves like bishop d2, bishop b3, and with these threats like knight e5, knight g5, knight f7, combined with open files here for the two towers, it looks very scary to play. But castles really is the only way to keep the game going. Also, if you go queen f6 here after bishop g5, again, it's spaghetti-o time. The queen is under pressure. You're going to lose the knight. Just nothing that black can do. So Pragg plays bishop e6, hoping now that instead of castling kingside, he's going to be able to castle the king to the queen side. Arjun trades. We get rook d1. Now we get queen b6. And here Pragg plays check and goes for the move queen to e4. Now, at this point, as you can tell from the valuation bar, Pragg is just dead lost here because Arjun has prevented him from castling queenside. If you castle kingside after takes, There's now the move rook to d7 here, and the knight and the rook are under massive pressure. Even knight g5 here and king h1 is also very good, as white will win the rook. So there are multiple paths to the v. So we get queen b5 from Pragg. Now Arjun takes the pawn. We get queen f5. And after queen to e2, Pragg simply cannot castle his king due to him hanging the knight on e7. So the king's stuck in the middle of the board. Bishop g5 incoming. There really is no hope left for Pragg to not lose. He goes rook f8. We get rook to d3 here with bishop g5 and rook to e3 incoming. We get bishop b6, bishop g5. Pragg goes rook f7. And now we get to move pawn to g4. Now, this is not the only way to win. Even rook to e1 here would have been very, very clean. But g4 is played instead. Pragg goes queen g6. Now we get rook to e1 here. The knight is being completely overloaded with the double stack and the pin. We get bishop takes f2. Here we get king takes, queen takes g5. Arjun calmly moves the king. You can't take the queen due to the pin. We get queen c5. And here Arjun plays move knight e5, attacking the rook. Pragg moves the rook to f4. We get knight to d7 here. Now the knight hits the queen and the rook hit the knight. We get queen g5. And Arjun plays the crushing move queen to e6. Now, on move 31, at long last, Pragg is finally able to castle his king out of the center. But after the move knight to f6, he must resign the game. There's really nothing you can do here. If you play rook f7, which is another move, there's knight e5 hitting the rook. And a sample line, which is really cool, is rook to f6, check, king f8, and white can sack the queen. And after rook takes queen, you take the rook, and the king has no escape square available. So it's GG, why not? So there's really nothing that Pragg can do here, so he castles. But after Arjun plays knight f6, Pragg resigns. If you move the king to b8, you hang the rook, and then you hang the knight. If you move the king to c7, I take with check. I take the rook. Either way, black is going to lose both the rook and the knight and will resign in a few moves or simply be checkmated. So a masterful game from Arjun. He showcases the drawbacks to playing this Queen's Gambit accepted. Pragg was up a pawn in the opening, but Arjun played for the momentum, played against Pragg's lack of development. And this is a textbook example of why playing with the initiative is so dangerous. So for Arjun, a classic win in round one, so he's off to a great start as well. We'll see what happens in the rest of the tournament, but that is going to do it for our recap of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament, which is being held in the Netherlands. Hope you guys enjoyed this recap. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with more great content in the very near future. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.